Welcome, dear horror listener. You're tuning into Horror Radio, and I'm truly grateful you're here. Whether you're a long-time listener or just stumbled upon this channel, thank you for joining me for another scary tale. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and means more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, what brought you here, or even what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Your support keeps this channel going, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now, let's get into today's horror story. It was one of those summer nights in Austin where the air never really cools down, even after the sun's been gone for hours. The heat clings to the pavement, rising up from the blacktop in invisible waves, mixing with the smell of barbecue smoke and spilled beer that lingers downtown long after the food trucks close. We've been there for a few days already, a group of friends renting a house just outside the city. It wasn't fancy, an aging rental with creaky floors and a backyard that backed on a patch of woods, but it was ours for the week, and it gave us space to spread out, drink, and pretend we were younger than we really were. Every evening, like clockwork, we'd pile into an Uber and head downtown. The pattern was always the same: long, noisy nights crammed with music and laughter, then dragging ourselves back in the morning sunburned, dehydrated, and already swearing we'd take it easier next time. Of course, we never did. Austin had that effect on us. It made restraint feel impossible. My name's Matt, and that night still comes back to me more vividly than I'd like. I was 27 then, with a decent job that didn't pay enough but paid enough for trips like this. I was traveling with 3 close friends: Josh, another guy my age who I'd known since college, and Anna and Rachel, but we met a few years later through mutual friends. It was an odd dynamic. We all got along, and nights out were easy when you knew you didn't have to babysit anyone. By the third night, we'd fallen into the rhythm of the city. Parking anywhere near 6th Street was hell, so we'd given up on driving ourselves and just used Ubers. It was easy, cheap, and it meant no one had to worry about staying sober. We thought it was the safest choice. The driver that picked us up that evening didn't set off any alarms at first. He was older than most, mid-40s maybe, heavy set, his hair thinning under a faded baseball cap. He wore a polo shirt that had seen better days, and the smell of cigarette smoke clung to him faintly, the way it does to someone who doesn't bother hiding the habit. He didn't smile much, just nodded when we climbed in and pulled onto the highway. I'd had drivers who were overly chatty before, and some who barely spoke at all. This guy fell somewhere in the middle, making conversation but directing it mostly toward Anna and Rachel in the back seat. I didn't catch it first. I was sitting in the passenger seat, scrolling through playlists on my phone, trying to pick something that didn't make me sound like I was trying too hard. But later, the girls told me how often he'd been glancing at them in the rearview mirror. Not just glances, long, lingering looks, his eyes flicking back and forth between the road and their reflections. His questions were too pointed. Where are we headed? Which bars do we like? Were we planning to stay out late? Anna kept her answers vague. Rachel leaned into politeness the way women often feel forced to, but Josh and I cut in a few times, giving short, firm replies meant to signal that the conversation was over. The driver barely acknowledged us. He just kept circling back to the women, like we weren't even there. By the time we reached the edge of downtown, the car felt heavier than it should have. The silence was thick, the kind you can't quite explain, but everyone feels. I was relieved when I spotted the familiar lights of the warehouses turned clubs, the glow of neon signs bleeding into the street. But instead of stopping at the designated drop-off point, like every other Uber had, the driver pulled onto a side street and parked. Josh and I locked eyes for a split second. Something in me clenched. "We're good here," I said quickly, already reaching for the door handle. The driver didn't respond. He just shifted the car in a park, turned off the engine, and when we got out, so did he. That was the first red flag that hit hard. Drivers don't do that. They don't follow you out of the car unless they're helping with luggage. and none of us had anything but our wallets and phones. He didn't offer a reason either, didn't say he needed directions or that he was stretching his legs. He just locked the car behind him and started walking in the same direction we were headed. We didn't confront him. Maybe we should have, but confrontation doesn't come easy when you're unsure. Instead, we walked faster, straight toward the pedestrian-only section of downtown where cars weren't allowed. I kept glancing over my shoulder, hoping to see him veer off. He didn't. When we stopped near the entrance gate to wait for the rest of our group, he stopped too, just a few feet back, hovering like he was with us. I tried to play it off, forced a circle conversation with Josh and the girls, keeping my back angled toward him. But he kept chiming in anyway, throwing out comments like some awkward friend tagging along. "Lot of people out tonight," he said. "Gonna be a fun one." His English was slightly broken, but it was clear enough. That was when I pulled out my phone, pretending it had just buzzed, and texted our friends. "New bar instead. We'll meet you there." Josh caught on immediately. He nodded, then took the lead, guiding us down one of the narrow side streets. Austin's downtown is a maze of alleys and cross streets, packed with bars, food trucks, and clusters of people moving between them. We wove through tourists and college kids, ducked around slow walkers, took quick turns at every corner. We weren't running, but the pace was deliberate. Every time I glanced back, he was still there, not rushing, not trying to catch up, just walking, always keeping us in sight. My stomach was tight by the time we hit the plaza. It was the busiest spot downtown, hundreds of people jammed together in line for a live music venue, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder. We cut through the crowd like we were late, ignoring the annoyed looks, and when we finally spelled out the other side, I turned and didn't see him anymore. For the first time all night, I let myself breathe. We regrouped at the bar with our friends, ordered drinks, and tried to laugh it off. "Just some weirdo," Rachel said, though her voice was unsteady. Probably didn't even realize he was creeping us out. Josh shook his head. He realized. We tried not to dwell on it. 2 hours later, the music and drinks had done their job, and it felt like he was already fading into memory, until he walked through the door. I swear my chest dropped out when I saw him. Same polo, same heavy frame, standing a foot from our table with that half smile like we're old friends. "Hey guys," he said. The four of us froze. Anna's eyes widened. Rachel's hand went still on her glass. Josh's jaw clenched tight enough I could see the muscle twitch. It was our friend Chris, bigger than all of us, and built like someone who knew his way around a weight room, who finally stood up. His voice was calm, steady. "We're not interested. Leave us alone." For a moment, the driver just stared. His expression flickered. Surprise. Then something sharper, like calculation. After a pause, he shrugged. "No problem," he said. And just like that, he walked out. We sat in silence for a long time, unsure if we'd really seen the last of him. But we hadn't. Around 3 in the morning, the four of us ended up packed into a club, music pulsing so loud I could feel in my chest. I was in the middle of the dance floor when Rachel suddenly stiffened beside me. I turned and saw him behind her, pressed close, his body angled deliberately into hers. Josh reacted before I could. He shoved between them, grabbed the guy by the collar, and shouted over the music, "What the hell are you doing?" The driver didn't flinch. He didn't fight back or look embarrassed. He just stared, blank and steady, like he'd been caught too early in whatever plan he had. A bouncer was on us in seconds, irritation written across his face. At first, he looked ready to kick us all out, but when we shouted over each other, explaining how this guy had followed us from his car through the streets, into bars, and now onto a dance floor, his expression changed. He asked the driver a few clipped questions, then grabbed him by the arm and escorted him straight out the door. We didn't leave right away. None of us wanted to. We stayed another hour, circling near the back of the club, waiting for the adrenaline to fade and the paranoia to wear down. Even when we finally did leave, we lingered near the sidewalk before ordering another Uber. triple-checking the license plate before he climbed in. The ride home was silent. None of us wanted to admit what we were thinking, but it was written all over our faces. He hadn't just been a pushy driver. He'd chosen us. He followed us. And if we hadn't been paying attention, if we hadn't confronted him, it could have ended differently. That night changed the way I see rideshares. I don't care how cheap or convenient they are. There's a point where convenience isn't worth the risk. Now, when I order one, I check everything. The driver's name, the car, the license plate. I don't get in if anything feels even slightly off. And if a driver ever blurs the line between professional and personal, I don't hesitate to report it. Because sometimes it's not about the ride at all. Sometimes it's about the shadow that follows you long after the car door closes. It was one of those nights where time slipped away faster than I realized. I've been hanging out at a friend's apartment on the edge of Nashville, a little too far from where I live to walk, and by the time I finally checked my phone, it was past 2 in the morning. Most of my friends had already settled into couches and spare blankets, but I've never been the type to sleep well at someone else's place. I wanted my own bed, my own space, so I decided to call an Uber. My name's Claire, and I'm not someone who's ever been fully comfortable with rideshares. I use them when I have to, but there's always this edge of anxiety that comes with getting into a stranger's car, especially at night. I tell myself it's normal, that being cautious is just common sense, but even so, I could feel my chest tighten as I pressed confirm on the app. It was a long ride home, close to 40 minutes, and I already regretted not staying over. When the car pulled up, it was a gray Camry, clean on the outside but faintly smelling of smoke inside. The driver was a man in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. He smiled when I got in and, almost immediately, said, "You're really pretty." The words landed raw, not because it was the worst thing I'd ever heard. Plenty of drivers make small talk, but because it was the very first thing out his mouth. No hello, no is this for Claire? Just that. A compliment that didn't feel like small talk at all. I muttered thanks and shifted my back closer to me, my shoulders tightening. The engine hummed as we pulled onto the road, the streetlights flashing rhythmically through the window. A few minutes later, he glanced toward me and asked, "Was that your boyfriend standing at the door?" It was my friend Evan, who had walked me out, but my gut clenched at the question. Something about the way he asked made me feel cornered, like there was a wrong answer. I said, "Yeah," quickly, letting the word hang in the air. He grinned, eyes flicking back to the road. "He's a lucky guy." Then, softer, "Really lucky. You're beautiful." I didn't respond this time. My throat felt tight, and I turned my attention to the glowing map on his phone mounted near the dash. I always watch it closely, partly out of habit, partly out of the same anxiety that never really goes away. That's when I noticed it. The car wasn't following the route. He cleared his throat. "I know a quicker way. We'll take a detour." The word itself, detour, snapped me fully awake. The map on the Uber app showed a straight shot toward the highway, but instead, he veered deeper into back roads. Roads that cut through stretches of farmland and sparse houses. Roads that got darker with every turn. I could feel my pulse in my ears. "Oh, I'd prefer if you stuck with the app," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to sound. He just gave a short laugh. "Don't worry, I've driven this city for years. I know the roads better than the app does." I didn't argue. My brain was moving too fast, spinning through what I should do, who I should call. My first instinct was my dad, but when I pressed his name, it rang and rang. He'd be asleep. Of course he would. It was after 3. My hand shook as I scrolled. Then I did something I'd never done before. I dialed 911. When the operator answered, I forced my voice into something steady, pretending I was on the phone with family. "Hi, Dad," I said, loud enough for the driver to hear. "I'm on my way home. I'm in the Uber right now." The operator's voice was calm, measured. "Are you in danger?" she asked. I swallowed. "I don't know," I said quietly. She understood immediately. "Okay, I'm going to ask you yes or no questions. Answer like you're talking to your dad." "Uh-huh," I said, as if responding to something only I could hear. "Is the car black?" "No, gray." "Yes." She asked about the make, the location. I kept my answers short, trying to sound casual, like a one-sided conversation. The driver didn't seem suspicious, though every time I glanced at him, I caught him sneaking looks my way. His hands rested loose on the wheel, too relaxed for how fast my heart was pounding. The operator asked where I was. I squinted at the dim street signs rushing past and repeated them aloud, pretending I was giving my dad updates. She paused, then said firmly, "Tell the driver you'd like to take the highway instead. Tell him now." My palms were damp as I pressed the phone closer to my cheek. "Hey, Dad says to stick to the highway. He doesn't like when I take the back roads this late." The driver hesitated, eyes narrowing for a split second. Then he gave a small shrug. "Fine, the highway's a little longer, but okay." I exhaled slowly, relief mixing with fresh nerves. The operator stayed on the line. "We're going to reroute you near a police station. I'll give you an address. Ask him to drop you there." I repeated the address like it was nothing, asking the driver if he could change the drop-off. He frowned at first, muttering about it being out of the way, but when I pressed, softly, politely, he finally changed course. The last 10 minutes of that ride stretched endlessly. I kept up the act of chatting with my dad, tossing in little comments like, "Yep, I'll be there soon," while the operator quietly told me stay calm. My heart was still hammering, but I clung to her voice like a lifeline. When we finally pulled in the neighborhood near the station, the streetlights cast long shadows across tidy houses. The driver slowed, pulling up to the curb. I forced myself to smile, thanked him quickly, and stepped out with shaking hands. A police cruiser was parked 2 houses down, lights off, engine idling. I walked straight to it, my legs trembling with every step. The officer inside rolled down the window, gave me a nod, and I felt the first real wave of safety crash over me. The Camry lingered for a moment before pulling away, disappearing back into the night. Later, sitting in the passenger seat of the cruiser, I tried to process what had happened. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe he really didn't know a quicker way. But my gut told me otherwise. The way he looked at me, the way he ignored the app, the way he didn't seem to care how uncomfortable I was. Now, I only take Ubers in the daytime, and I always share my ride with friends or family. It feels restrictive, unfair even, but I've accepted that my safety has to come first. That night taught me something I won't forget. When the alarms in your head get loud, you don't ignore them. You listen, because sometimes it isn't about whether you're right or overreacting. It's about making sure you get home at all. On a cold February evening in Indianapolis, a young couple checked into a hotel near one of the city's largest shopping districts. It was supposed to be a small celebration, just a night away from the usual grind, a chance to breathe without the demands of work or parenting pressing down on them. They left their child with family, met up with a friend, and set out into the night with nothing heavier on their minds than food, drinks, and the promise of a late evening. My name's Andrew, and I wasn't there that night, but I followed this case closely from the beginning. The man at the center of it, David Harper, was a year younger than me, 28. He and his wife were ordinary people, the kind you'd pass in a grocery store and never think twice about. Maybe that's why his disappearance has stayed lodged in my mind. Because ordinary people don't just disappear in the middle of a city. And yet, that's exactly what happened. The evening unfolded the way nights out often do when you're trying to escape routine. They started simple, dinner at a casual restaurant not far from the hotel. David's wife later said they laughed more in that short time than they had in months. The kind of lightness that comes when the noise of work and parenting momentarily slips away. They weren't reckless people, but they let themselves relax. A drink here, another one there. The presence of their friend made it easy to lean into the night. By the time the bars around the shopping district began closing near midnight, the three of them weren't ready to stop. Energy has a way of building on itself when the streets are still alive with people drifting in and out of neon-lit storefronts. So, they ordered an Uber to a club across town, the kind of place that doesn't even come alive until most others have shut their doors. The ride there was uneventful, just another 20 minutes through the city. None of them could have imagined it would end up being the final stretch of normalcy in David's life. Inside the club, the hours blurred. Music throbbed, drinks kept coming, and the small circle of three tucked themselves into the kind of anonymity late-night spots often promise. When the lights finally flicked on around 3 a.m. and the night gave way to exhaustion, they called another Uber and made their way back to the hotel. That's when things shifted. As the car slowed to the curb, David leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the building in front of them. According to his wife, he shook his head, muttering that it wasn't the right place. She pointed to the glowing hotel sign just overhead, but he kept insisting. Something in his voice carried a strange certainty, like he was caught between two realities, one where the hotel stood tall and familiar, and another where it was a stranger's building in the wrong city. He seemed confused, disoriented in a way that didn't match the alcohol they consumed. He wasn't slurring or stumbling. It was more like his mind had slipped just a few beats out of sync. His wife suggested they go upstairs. That rest would clear his head, but he shook her off. He needed air, he said. He was going to take a walk. His friend offered to follow him, if only to make sure he didn't wander far. His wife, exhausted and in need of the bathroom, said she'd head up briefly and come right back down. That split second of decision, three people dividing instead of staying together, was the beginning of the unraveling. When she returned to the lobby less than 20 minutes later, David was gone. The timeline after that becomes a haunting loop of calls and waiting. At 3:37 a.m., her phone rang. It was David. His voice was tired but calm, the way someone sound when they decided they just need a few minutes alone. He told her he was walking and would be back soon. She sat in the lobby, her eyes locked on the glass doors, convinced that at any second he'd appear through them, brushing off the chill of the night. But the minutes stretched thin. At 4:10 a.m., another call came. This time, his words twisted into something unsettling. He told her he was in the woods, but could see the hotel and would return in 5 minutes. His tone was steady, like he wasn't panicked at all, just relaying information. But there were no woods. Not there. The hotel was surrounded by restaurants, storefronts, and wide parking garages. The closest patches of trees were miles away. Still, she held on to his words, convinced his return was imminent. But he never walked back through those doors. What followed was hours of silence that seemed to swell with dread. His wife called friends in the middle of the night, her voice tight with fear. Some told her not to overthink it, to give him time, that maybe he was drunk and needed space. It's easy to minimize the worry when you're not the one sitting in the empty hotel lobby, staring into a city that suddenly feels endless. By sunrise, panic had fully taken hold. She called another friend who lived nearby, and together they combed the streets, ducked into parking structures, checked benches and corners where someone might collapse from exhaustion. Nothing. The city was waking up around them, morning traffic filling the streets, storefronts flickering back to life. But David had vanished. At 10:30 a.m., she called the police. Investigators started where they always do, with cameras and phones. Surveillance footage confirmed what little they already knew. David had walked away from the hotel, alone, shortly after 3 a.m. His phone records painted the strangest picture of all. He'd used Google Voice to pull up GPS directions, specifically asking to be guided back to the Easton Suites. But no one knew why. He was already there. It was as if he thought he'd wandered away from the very building he was standing next to. After that, everything stopped. No more calls. No more sightings. Not a single clue that could point anyone toward what happened in the hours after his final call. And here's the part that gnaws at me: the Uber. The driver who dropped them off that night wasn't questioned right away. When he finally was, nothing stuck. He insisted everything seemed normal, that he had no reason to remember the group beyond being another late-night fare. But I can't stop wondering, was there something in that ride? Something small and imperceptible that shook David, that triggered the confusion his wife described? Or was the Uber just another ordinary moment, and David's unraveling began only after he stepped out into the cold air? Speculation has filled the void where facts should be. Some say he wandered too far, disoriented, and succumbed to the February cold. Temperatures that night dipped dangerously low. Others whisper about foul play, that maybe he crossed paths with a stranger who saw an opportunity in a man walking alone. And then there are darker theories, ones that point inward, that his wife or friend may have known more than they admitted. But without evidence, those whispers are only shadows stretching across the silence. I've stood in that shopping district myself, trying to reconcile the place with the story. The wide streets, the constant glow of neon, the hum of cars and voices that make it feel like the city never truly sleeps. It's not a place where you'd think someone could vanish, and yet David did. That night replays in my mind with unsettling clarity. 3 people step out of an Uber, 2 make it safely upstairs. 1 never returns. It doesn't matter how many times I turn it over, the shape of it never changes. The Uber ride was the last piece of ordinary in David's night. Every detail after that feels warped by unease. What did he see or believe he saw that convinced him he wasn't where he was supposed to be? Why did he sound so certain he could see the hotel, even while claiming he was in woods that didn't exist? What landscape was his mind conjuring as he spoke those words? David Harper hasn't been seen since that night. No wallet, no phone, no body, just a string of calls that led nowhere, and an absence that still presses against everyone who knew him. His wife lives with the sharp edges of uncertainty. His parents endure anniversaries without closure. And for people like me, watching from the outside, the story settles into the quiet parts of the mind, refusing to let go. Because what happened to David could happen to anyone. It could happen to you, to me, to anyone who thinks a night out will end with nothing more dramatic than a hangover. One moment you're riding in the back of an Uber, safe in the routine of it. The next, you stepped onto the curb and into a kind of silence that swallows everything. And for me, the thought that lingers, the one that chills even now, is how quickly the familiar can tilt into the foreign. That's what this story is, at its core. Not a neat mystery with an answer tucked inside, but an open wound of questions. Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones with endings. They're the ones that stop in the middle, leaving only unanswered calls, a trail of neon lights, and a name that echoes in the silence of what might have been.